We've all heard the saying, if these walls could talk. Well, in this case, not the walls, but the streets. The streets of historic Ybor City. If they could talk, oh, the stories they would tell. And while the streets can't tell us the story, on this episode of Qué Pasa Tampa, we speak with Scott Deitche, author of the Cigar City Mafia, and oh, the stories he shares with us of what happened right here in Ybor City, our home. You won't want to miss this episode of Qué Pasa Tampa. Today we are here with Scott Deitche, the author of Cigar City Mafia. And oh my God, Scott, I can't thank you enough for being here with me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
What a fascinating book. What piqued your interest in writing this book?
I grew up in New Jersey, outside New York City, so they're always in the shadow of a lot of the stories about organized crime coming out of New York. And my mom liked the old gangster movies, so we grew up watching those. Always kind of had a little bit of a fascination. Really, after the movie Goodfellas came out, I started reading a lot of mob books. And in about 1994-95, I met a guy online who's a historian in England on this mafia website. And he said, hey, I see that you're now living in St. Pete, Tampa area. I have some information on the mob in Tampa. And I only had heard the name Trafficante before. So he sent me all these newspaper articles about Charlie Wall and Trafficante and Jimmy Lamia, and really piqued my interest because I didn't know a lot of the history of the city, the organized crime element here locally.
And Charlie Wall, actually, there's a lot of good associated with that name as well. I understand his father was mayor and cousin.
Yeah, he came from a very highly regarded blue blood, if you will, family. He took a little bit of a different path in life, though, that's for sure. But he was able to leverage his family's connections in judicial system, lawyers, law enforcement, to further his criminal empire. So he was able to make good on some of the family ties.
Yeah, I read that, and I know that back in, I guess, when he was the dean of the underworld, it was mainly booze and bolita. Is that how?
Yeah, bolita legal gambling in general is really the lifeblood of organized crime at that time. And certainly during Prohibition, you had a lot of not only rum coming up from Cuba, but molasses, corn sugar, a lot of the raw materials, and they would set up still operations. Which now in like Carrollwood or New Tampa, which were then the woods, so they would have these stills and make liquor here locally. And also a lot of narcotics at that time too were coming into the port of Tampa. Yeah, a lot of heroin.
I know bolita was big, and I do remember it as a child, hearing about it, but I saw some of these names through here, and there's still names that are around today. You got these stories from talking with family members.
Yeah, well, when I first started doing the research, it was a lot of people didn't want to talk, and I understand that. I mean, I'm not writing about specific people, I'm just writing about history that happened and want to kind of try to make that come alive. But over the years, I've met a number of the people, not only that are related to people in the book, but actually people I did write about in the book. And I've shared stories and memories of Ybor and Tampa at that time. So it's kind of really fleshed out more of my understanding of the criminal underworld here at that time.
Yeah, very interesting, and I even understand you've been asked to speak at Ybor Chamber events and USF and just talk, because it's Tampa history, it's what happened here.
Yeah, I still, the book's been out 10 years now, and my second one, The Silent Dawn, about Trafficante, has been out 8 years now, and I still do talks all the time. Just did one not too long ago, so there's still a fascination with that topic, and I think a lot of people move into the area because there's always newcomers coming here, aren't aware of that history, so they're anxious to hear when they hear, hey, there was a mafia here in Tampa. I never knew that.
Right, and the ethnic makeup of Ybor was different. You had the Cubans and the Spaniards and Italian, and that was different than up north.
Yeah, in most of the big cities, especially up north where the mafia were active, you had this ethnic succession where you had the Irish, the Jewish, and the Italian gangsters at that time in the 20s and 30s that later became the mob. Maybe second only to New Orleans, you had an interesting ethnic mix where you had Cubans and Spanish people that were involved in organized crime at that time that were as influential as some of the Sicilian-made members of the mafia. So that was really kind of unique.
Yeah, and actually my family is Sicilian, and I have to admit, when I got the book, Scott, I went right to the back of cast of characters to make sure Chucho wasn't in there, and whew, I read it and we were all good. But I do remember growing up, stories, just like you say, people come to you and share stories. Next to where my mom and my aunt grew up, where my grandmother lived, was Jojo Antonori's family, and they knew him, and he would take them to buy ice cream, and my grandmother would always make excuses, you know, to not let them go, not because she didn't like him, but just afraid of what could have happened.
Yeah. And again, you're only talking about a small group of guys in this whole giant community. So, but yeah, a lot of the names are still around, and nobody's really active in anything anymore. So, you know, a lot of them became lawyers and doctors, and you know, growing up in the streets of Ybor in the 20s, there wasn't as much of the opportunity as there is now. So, you know, organized crime probably had a little bit more of an allure back then, and you see that in most of the major cities around the country.
Yeah, and Bolita was the lotto of today, only illegally.
Exactly.
And I understand they used to rig it somehow.
Yeah, in the early years when they actually had the Bolita balls, which you could see now at the Florida History Center downtown, they would actually drill holes in some of them, fill them with lead, so certain numbers would fall to the bottom of the bag, so they would pick out certain numbers, weighing the odds, because, you know, the house always wants to win. So,
sure.
But it was very popular because you could bet a dime, a nickel, a penny, make $50, $60, $100 back during the Depression. That was a lot of money.
That's
so
huge.
it was a big part of life here in Ybor and West Tampa.
Now I understand you also do walking tours.
Yeah.
Here through Ybor City. I mean, I hear they're very successful. I'm looking forward to coming to one.
Yeah, we work them through Cigar City magazine, and we do them once a month, and it's about an hour and a half walking tour of Ybor City, and we go to some of the spots where Charlie Wall hung out, some of the
Where
spots.
Were they?
Like the El Dorado, we'll go by the site of the old El Dorado, up by the Cuban Club, and the site where some guys kind of ended their careers, let's say, on the streets of Ybor.
Wow, interesting. And so you just walk all through there.
Yeah. So we hit about 15, 18 spots.
I am very excited. I can't wait to come to that. I also hear that there's a museum in Las Vegas, and Tampa's a big part of that.
Yeah, the Mob Museum in Vegas opened up last year. They just celebrated their one-year anniversary last week, and I had amassed a good deal of material, original mug shots, wall charts of the Tampa Mob, memorabilia from their time in Cuba, and I donated it to the museum. And there's big parts of the museum where you have mobsters from around the country. In Tampa, there's a lot of guys from Tampa up there, a lot of memorabilia from the mob in Tampa, from law enforcement that I've gathered that's a part of the museum, because the museum not only looks at the history of the mob, but law enforcement activities. So I donate a lot of stuff that law enforcement had put together against organized crime here locally.
How long did it take you to write this book?
It took about 5 years for the first book. There was a lot of stops and starts about kind of learning how to do research, how to write a book, and over the years it's gotten a lot easier, and I've gotten it down to about a year now. I can turn around a book, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work at first, but I enjoyed it for sure.
Yeah, because I guess that was back before the time when you really just had Google and things right at your fingertips. You actually
you had to go dig through files and, you know, look at stuff. It was a lot harder to find public records and that kind of information. It's so much easier now. So much is digitized. Even the FBI reports, used to have to make a request and wait maybe a year to get the files. Now they've digitized so much of that's available. You can just jump online and pick it up in, you know, less than 5 minutes.
But, you know, in going through that, you probably discovered even more and more. And
that's the trade-off, is sometimes there's an inherent value in going through, digging for stuff, looking for one thing, but finding 2 or 3 other items of interest. So it's kind of a give and take at times.
Yeah. Was there any jackpot, if you will, that you found in research, and something that you didn't expect to find?
Yeah, I found some really good material at the Dade County archives, which that were related to the mob here in Tampa. And E. Wilson Purdy, who just passed away last week. He was a former police chief of St. Pete. He was the head of the Dade County Crime Commission. He put together a big dossier on Santo Trafficante, and I actually found some of his original documents and photos there in the Dade County archives, and those are very, very interesting find.
And I understand, you know, here the Tampa mob, or mafia, if you will, really had some strong connections in Cuba.
Well, the connections dated back to the 1930s, and by the early 1950s, when the casino industry was in full swing in Havana, the Tampa mob had interest in a number of casinos, the Sanssouci, the Capri, the Deauville, there was a big presence, and a lot of people from Tampa would go over and vacation there because it was a short flight from Tampa to Havana. And I met a couple people that actually worked in the casinos for Trafficante and Meyer Lansky as pit bosses or dealers.
Wow, and I actually just heard on the news this week that the Capri is reopening or has reopened, so that's really cool. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you have any other books in the works?
Yeah, I have a couple books now. I'm working on a book, A History of the Mafia in New Jersey, my old hometown.
Yeah.
And also another book called Cocktail Noir, which I write a liquor column, so it'll be looking at favorite cocktails of true crime writers, fictional private eyes, and gangsters.
You know, now that you say cocktails, they used to hide the booze and everything somewhere around in here. Were there tunnels? I mean, there's so many rumors of tunnels and...
There are rumors of tunnels all over, but there are a couple places where there were. Under the old Blue Ribbon supermarket that burned down, there definitely were some underground, not necessarily, or there were passageways, but storage areas as well. And the rumor was during Prohibition they would bring in the booze and the raw materials for the still operations, and they would hide them underground. And in that part of Ybor, up by where the Blue Ribbon used to be, around a little bit higher elevation, so that they were able to have these underground compartments, if you will.
So they would start at the Blue Ribbon side, and then where would they go?
One went across the street to was the Czar nightclub tracks to that building. The other one went near the Ritz Theater across the street as well.
Have you ever been in any of the tunnels?
Never been. I've seen the opening of one. Before they paved over the parking lot there was a storm that washed it away, and there was a small opening to one of the tunnels under the Blue Ribbon that you could see, but I've never been in one.
Well, I can't wait to read your upcoming books. I mean, I know these have just been amazing, and I've loved them, and I thank you for all the research and sharing the history with us.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate
Thank you.
it.
I'm really excited to be here today with Tom Snelling, who is the city's Planning and Development Director. Happens to be my former boss, but I always love spending time with you, Tom, and this Development Services Center. Hundreds and hundreds of services take place in this very building.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what happens here.
Any type of permit that you need, residential, commercial, water and wastewater utility applications come through here. All of our recent planning, major planning activities are coordinated through my division here and planning division here. Zoning, rezonings, alcoholic beverages. We pretty much do anything that gets built in the city of Tampa at some point or another, starts, ends, or is reviewed through this building and my staff that works here.
Wow, so when you say planning, I mean, you're really talking, a developer comes in, I'm planning on building a subdivision.
Subdivision comes through here, every part of it. Subdivision starts here, and it comes through here, and there's 3 phases. There's a preliminary construction phase, which is where they're actually building the roads, putting in the infrastructure, the water, the sewer, the stormwater facilities. And then the final plat, which is all of the legal recording of the documents and any of the covenants that go along with the subdivisions.
Yeah, and in the subdivisions, I mean, there's so many little details and little small things that people, myself included, kind of overlook. All the streets that go up in there.
Oh, yep.
I mean, how in the world, does your staff have to sit here and think of all these street names?
Sometimes we wish we would. It would make our lives and jobs a little easier, but no, the developer they will name the streets, and they will bring the street names proposals to us. And frankly, that's the beginning of all the streets that are built in the city of Tampa. They all started out as a part of a subdivision plat as far back as the city of Tampa has existed. So they'll propose the names, and depending on what's going on at the time in history, it could, a lot of our areas are themed. Mr. Cook's going to talk a little bit more about that, and that's kind of a very neat and some of the quirkier things that go on in the city in terms of names. But the process itself starts with the developers. We evaluate them to make sure the street names, they're not offensive. We make sure that they can be pronounced easily, so for emergency situations, people can say where they are or understand where they are. We also make sure that there is no duplication within Hillsborough County or Temple Terrace or Plant City. With the advent of the electronic 911, that has become a very important thing to not have more than one street in the county or within the city and within any of the EMS, emergency management people's areas where they have to respond.
Absolutely, because I mean, that could be critical. It could be a life or death situation if you have duplicate names.
And the reality is, it's funny, many years ago when 911, E911 was first starting. One of my employees who worked in the addressing section, he actually lived on Ohio Street in West Tampa. And there was a knock on his door and the police were responding and they showed up at the wrong Ohio Street and they were supposed to be showing up at the one that was down in Port Tampa area. So that's the only time I've ever heard of that happening, but if it happens once and it happens to be your particular emergency, once is enough.
That's
and so
right.
we that always is like at the forefront of when we try to protect and make sure that things don't get duplicated.
So there's a lot of research that goes into it.
A great deal of research when we're trying to make sure no duplication, no same addresses, make sure that the addresses are sequentially on the right side of the street, evens on one side, odds on the number, and that they switch at the appropriate north-south indicators. It's a lot of very boring stuff, I would imagine, but it's very important. You know, as years go by, people learn, they identify landmarks by that. They navigate through the city, their friends come down, they navigate through the city, all based on the names of streets and landmarks and addressing.
So how long does the process take?
From the original naming of a street through the subdivision process, it's typically a 3 to 4 month period. Preliminary plat, you know, usually takes 4 to 6 weeks when it's all said and done, but they can do concurrent reviews of construction drawings where the infrastructure is built and in the final. Typically, it doesn't take any longer than 6 months from start to finish to have it all done, but there's a lot of things people can do along the way as they start their project to get the streets being built.
Sure. And I know that you had said the developers come in with the names. Do you have any idea of how someone scratched their head and just kind of think of some names?
Well, I think yes, sometimes they do. It almost sounds that way with the streets, but there's a lot of names. You know, they'll pick themes like, you know, states, Alaska, Hawaii, and go through that way. Others will pick, you know, location, geographic kinds of things. Sulphur Springs, I think Mr. Cook's going to touch on that. They'll also pick presidents, trees.
And you know what? Now you said states. I heard that Nebraska was actually named just after the state.
It was named after Nebraska, the state. You're exactly right. There were a lot of Midwesterners from that part. When they renamed the street Nebraska, or they named the street Nebraska, they felt that as people were coming down from that part of the country, they would feel a little bit more at home, a little bit more welcomed and comforted by something familiar. So Florida was growing and doing anything they could at the time, so they said, let's try that. They were trying everything they could, so they named it Nebraska.
And I find that so fascinating because, you know, you just drive down the street and you see a street name, but you don't always think of all the things that go into it. Yeah. And like Howard Avenue. Do you know the story behind Howard?
Well, I thought it was the child of, was it Hugh McFarland?
You're exactly right.
He was like the first mayor of West Tampa. And he was thinking, they asked him, what are you going to name the streets? He wanted to name them quick. He said, well, I'm going to name this one after my son. And there it was. I don't know how much thought he gave it. And there's probably another street, if he had a daughter somewhere in there, Elena, or I don't know. There's probably another name in there that's related to his family. And then the trees, I thought he picked the trees because he needed to do it very quickly, and that was very easy for him to do. So he just went through, and a lot of the local trees, you know, cypress, laurel, cherry, fig, elm, so all of those streets kind of go up in sequential of that.
That is so fascinating. Tom, tell me, I know that they have to come here for street renaming, and although that doesn't happen very often, I'm sure that has a huge impact.
Well, street renaming is another, it is very involved. It's a fairly long process. A great deal of research goes into it. Just changing the blades of all the street names, there is an expense to that. We try to figure out how much it's actually going to cost to do that renaming. We do research again. We look at what the name is to try to make sure that it's a name that's not being duplicated anywhere in the county. We look at what other impact it's going to have on businesses, especially residents as well, but businesses especially, because as a business person, you may have trucks with your business name on it, with your street address. Your business itself may incorporate that street name into your business. Business cards, web pages, phone numbers, advertising, and invoices, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot. And business people they like to make sure that if something is going to happen that's going to have such a big effect on themselves and their business, because that's how they brand themselves that way a lot of times on their address.
What was the largest renaming in Hillsborough County or Tampa?
Physically, the longest stretch of street, East-West Street, that was renamed was when, if you remember the old Buffalo Avenue, it was renamed to Dr. Martin Luther King Avenue. And that was so long because not only did it take place within the city of Tampa, they worked together with Hillsborough County, so Dr. Martin Luther King has quite an expansive stretch east and west. So I would say that's the longest, geographically the longest.
Sure, and that's definitely one that was worthy. So it was worth, you know, changing the letterhead and the business cards.
There was a lot of discussion on it, as you can imagine. But in the end, everybody felt that, you know, the name was it had to happen. It was something that was terribly important to the city and to everybody involved.
Yeah, well, you've piqued my interest, and I really want to talk with Jimmy about his historical significance on names. But I've got to ask you. So I've heard so much back and forth on La Septima, 7th Avenue. Tell me about that. What's the name of the street?
As far as we're concerned, it's 7th Avenue because their addresses are 7th Avenue. La Septima, I'm not exactly sure of the spelling. You have Hispanic heritage, I don't. So whether the P is appropriate or not, it was debated at a long time. It was kind of fun. Everybody had a fun time with it. In the end, I think they have both of them up there. But the reality is that's Ybor City. Yeah. I mean, that's the quirkiness and the flavor that is Ybor City. And you're looking up and you see all this and it's just like, wow, you know, that's Ybor. So it kind of works there.
You're exactly right.
It might not work anywhere else, but it certainly works there.
It's our Spanglish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. I've learned a lot, and I can't wait to hear from Jimmy.
Okay, great. You're welcome.
Jimmy, thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with me.
You're welcome.
Tom tells me you've been doing this for a long time. How long?
Approximately 35 years.
Wow. So you remember when some of these things started coming through, when people started naming streets and all the streets renamed and changing?
For the most part, most of the ones since I've been with the city, there's actually only been approximately 13 of them, street renamings since I've been here. Most of the old ones happened a long time ago.
But tell me, I know like there's some that they stand out, you know, like Nebraska, different streets, but Howard Avenue, Swan. Tell me some of these, what are the significance behind some of these?
Howard Avenue was actually named after Hugh McFarland's son. Howard P, I think was his middle initial, McFarland. Swan was named after Colonel Reuben Swan, who was a developer of Suburb Beautiful in Hyde Park area. So.
And Dale Mabry?
Dale Mabry was actually started off as Vera Avenue, and it was renamed after Colonel Dale Mabry, who was a World War I aviator.
Wow, and so the other entrance into MacDill Air Force Base is MacDill, and that was also named after a military figure, if I'm...
That is correct. That was actually the first entrance into MacDill Air Force Base, which actually was called Southeast Air Base. It was actually renamed in 1939 when Colonel Leslie MacDill got killed in an airplane crash. And then when they extended Libson Avenue, which is also Roosevelt Avenue, into the base, they naturally just renamed it MacDill Avenue.
Wow, this to me is just so exciting. And so downtown you see a lot of presidents' names.
That's correct. That was the standard in the way plats were done in the past. They would do a theme, what's called a themed. For downtown, it's mainly presidents and military figures. You have Harrison, Polk, Washington, for example. And then you have military leaders like Cass, Twiggs.
Yeah, they were brigadier generals, I heard.
Generals, that's correct.
And then what about Adamo?
Adamo was actually named after Dr. Frank Adamo, who was he was actually chief of staff here at Hillsborough County Hospital, and then he went off to war and he actually became a prisoner of war.
No way. And so then when he came back, they named it after him in honor of him?
In honor of him, and it's actually officially Frank Adamo Drive, and we just shorten it to Adamo. But most people pronounce it Adamo.
But from now on, they're going to say Adamo because they're learning through you.
It's actually Adamo.
And what about Ashley?
Ashley was named after William Ashley, who was the first city clerk of the city of Tampa.
Oh my God, so see, you drive down these streets every single day, and I just think it's important because they were named after someone for a reason.
That's correct.
And to have you here to share that history, or just anyone, that's important because it was done for a reason.
Yes, and then for example, Jackson Street, a lot of people believe that was named after Andrew Jackson because of the present theme, but it was actually named after John Jackson, who is the mayor, first Tampa's mayor, and also the surveyor who laid out downtown Tampa.
Really? Jimmy, you must see all kind of different names that come to you, and you have to review them to make sure there's no duplication. It's got to be interesting.
Some of it's interesting, a lot of it's tedious, and a lot of it's, we coordinate with 911 to make sure we're not duplicating. For instance, we have a couple funny ones come across our desk. So
Yeah, just say,
interesting.
deny.
actually, a couple of them have gotten approved because they don't duplicate, and phonetically they make sense and they're not obscene. So there's nothing to stop us from not approving them.
Which has been the strangest or the funniest one?
In my opinion, it would be Frog Pocket Way, which is in South Tampa, just north of the MacDill Air Force Base, in a small townhouse development down there.
And there was no other, so it really went up, Frog Pocket Way?
No duplication, pronounced correctly, not offensive, no reason not to deny it.
Jimmy, which street has changed names the most time here in Tampa?
In my opinion, it would be what was used to be Ashley Street, Water Street, which became Ice Palace Drive, and then it was changed to St. Pete Times Forum Drive, and then it was just recently renamed back to Old Water Street in honoration of the History Museum that was built down there.
So that, you probably said, oh gosh, here we go again, huh?
Hopefully that's the last time.
That's right, that's right. Well, thank you so much. It's been just so interesting, Jimmy.
Oh, you're welcome.
As they say, you can't get to where you're going if you don't know where you've been. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Qué Pasa Tampa. I hope you found it just as interesting as I did. See you next time.